If you were in church last week, you got to hear Scott Koop. Today you get to hear Sherryl Koop. No relation, we just share the same last name. And what's interesting is that Scott is now at Square One, where I used to serve. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this morning. And Katie, thanks for leading. And as she said, I'm Sherryl Koop, and I'm the chaplain at Donwood Manor. I'd like to give you all just a little quick report on the place where I serve, and then we'll move into the sermon from Daniel 3. First of all, thank you for your support. That there is a board member from here, Larry Spicer. Carl has come to lead our assisted living tenants in Bible study, and I know that there are some of you who also have family that live at Donwood, so we are grateful for your support and care for us. I lead church services on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday mornings on the different units of Donwood Manor. And upon admission to Donwood Manor, we do a bit of what we call a spiritual assessment of each resident. And often when I speak with family members who are overseeing their loved ones, they tell me, my mother or my father does not attend church, do not ask them. They may want to see you as a person, but they don't want to have spiritual conversations. And so I say, all right, but we do invite everyone. So sure enough, there are 3 people, especially on one of the units, who have decided they do want to come to church. And they do want to have spiritual conversations. And they do want to know who Jesus is and why he is important to me and what my faith looks like. And I remember having a conversation with one of the gentlemen, and he said, "What have you done to my mother?" And I said, I've just opened the way for her to have conversations that perhaps she hasn't had for a very long time, or if ever, in her life. And I think when we are in the winter season of our life, perhaps faith and whether there is afterlife and all of those questions often come to mind, especially when we have more time to ponder them than perhaps we have before. And so she is a delightful addition to our services and also to the unit she is on. And 2 of the gentlemen who come to one of the other unit services, I was told also by their families that they would not want to come into a church service at all. And yet upon the death of one of the men's spouses, he said to me, "I need solace, and I think I will find it in the church service you lead." And he has been coming since, and we've had lots of good conversations. So I'm grateful for those. Also, this last year, we ran a pilot program through Spiritual Care, which I oversee, and it was an art therapy program. And we had a young woman who is an art therapist come in, and 6 students from King's School, which is a Christian school in West St. Paul, and they were partnered with residents one-on-one, and they did art together for 6 weeks, working in different mediums. And I remember one of the women who suffers from great dementia and often is nonverbal. When she came to art class, her face brightened up, and she was on task, and her conversations were exactly about what was happening around us, and her art was beautiful. And every week she would say, "Is my so-and-so, her partner, coming this week? I want to see her." And it was beautiful to see that relationship develop. And because of the success of that, we will move into doing that more regularly in this coming fall and winter. So I'm grateful for that. And this year, for the summer, we have many, many students. We were given 6 additional grants. So we have 22 students on site between Canada Summer Grants and the Green Team, and they work in many different areas. And I have an intern in Spiritual Care. She's an 18-year-old young woman from Crossroads MB Church, and she is working with me, and it's been a delight to get to know her this last week. And also because of where I serve, I have been privileged to do many funerals and memorial services for the residents, and it is a sacred time of getting to know their families and loved ones and being able to speak into the lives of many who are not faith followers of Jesus. So that's been a real privilege. And lastly, we have a grow-op at Donwood. And all of us love saying that, including the tenants and residents. We were given a very large grant to bring in 6 hydroponic units, and both residents and tenants and staff take care of the herbs and the vegetables that are growing there. And one of the interesting things is all the tenants and residents kept asking, when are those plants going in the garden? And we kept telling them they're never going in the garden because it's a very new way of gardening. And so all of that food is being taken care of by our chefs and making its way into our meals. And that's just a little window of some of the things that we are doing at Donwood and some of the things I'm a part of. And I love being there, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful to be here this morning. So we'll move into Daniel chapter 3. But do not fear, I will not be working through the chapter verse by verse as I have been known to do. However, I will focus on the verses that were read this morning, 13 to 28. So if you could open your Bibles or phones to Daniel 3, I will be using the New Living Translation. And you can join me in hearing what the Lord by his Spirit may be saying to us today. The story of King Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego may be well known to many of us because it is such a classic when we think of the Old Testament and Sunday school or vacation Bible school or camp settings. King Nebuchadnezzar was rather full of himself, and so he felt it was necessary to have the people in his kingdom not only worship idols of all kinds, but especially the gold statue he made that was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. It is thought that this statue represented Nebuchadnezzar's patron god called Nebu or Nabu, but was not made to represent the king himself. However, this statue god was of utmost importance, and so a decree was sent out by the king that every time anyone in the kingdom heard a horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, or other musical instrument, they were to bow down and worship the king's statue. Can you imagine how often one would need to be halting one's daily activity to bow, especially if one of your children or one of your neighbors would often practice their musical instrument? Bowing then probably could rival our best efforts at exercise, as it seems that constant bowing might be the practice of many in that day, and our smartphones would have a little thing, how many times have you bowed today? The consequence and failure to bow meant being thrown into a blazing furnace to die. So we have now covered verses 1 to 7. Verses 8 to 11 introduce us to some of the king's astrologers from the province of Babylon, who inform him that they have some information on Jews living in Babylon in regard to his edict. Verse 12 has them giving name to those men who did not follow the edict. And we find out that they are none other than Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are not just Jews living in Babylon, but have been put in charge of the province by the king himself. And they are not just refusing to bow to the king's newest edition of a god statue, but have not bowed to any of the other idol gods. In verses 13 to 15, we have King Nebuchadnezzar in a rage, and he orders the 3 Jewish men to be brought to him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come, and the king questions them on whether what he has heard from the astrologers is true, that they refuse to worship any of the idol gods, and especially his new statue. He then warns them that if their behavior does not change, they will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and ends his tirade with a sarcastic and mocking question. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? I suspect that most of us cannot directly relate to being asked to bow to an idol god with the threat of losing our lives in a blazing furnace. However, I also suspect that some of us may be able to relate to being tempted, encouraged, or coerced into leaving behind some of our belief system in order to fit in, and as a result, perhaps losing some of our integrity or watering down our faith commitment. This last week, the conversation about integrity came up again and again between some of my work colleagues and I. And 2 of us have professed in our work setting that we are Jesus followers. So this added some interesting perspectives to the conversations. One particular conversation comes to mind as I reflect on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. A fellow Jesus follower colleague had made a $61 purchase at a retail shop, and upon tapping their credit card, sensed that the transaction had not completed, even though the sales clerk assured them it had. When they got home and checked their credit card balance, Indeed, the transaction had not gone through. Now the dilemma: have items for free and given to the "I was able to get something for nothing" mentality that permeates our society, or return to the retail shop and make sure the transaction was paid for. After some internal battles, they decided to return to the shop and ask for the manager. When the manager understood why they were there, the manager could not believe they had come back. The manager thanked them over and over again and then called over the sales clerk that had served them. The sales clerk could not believe what they were witnessing and profusely thanked my colleague for returning, as it meant now that they had a balanced till for that day. Is this a small thing? Is it in any way relatable to our passage today? I would be curious to know your thoughts. Verses 16 to 18 give us the response that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have to the king's command. They defy him and say that the God they serve is able to rescue them, and even if he doesn't, that's a pretty important part of this. They will never serve the idol gods or bow down to the statue. Firm in their faith, these three Jewish men defy the king with full knowledge that their lives are on the line. Can you and I relate to this experience in any way? Perhaps we can. Perhaps we cannot. However, there are those amongst us who can. The story of my mom is one who could relate. She grew up in a home where both her parents were Jesus followers, and her maternal grandfather ran a Bible school on the Crimean Peninsula. When she was a young teenager, all religious freedoms were taken away due to political changes in that area of the world. And meeting in secret became the way to have faith gatherings, always at the risk of being imprisoned or losing their lives. At Donwood Manor, this is a similar story, not only for some of the residents, but also for several of the staff who have come as refugees to this country and to carry a deep and abiding faith in Jesus that was challenged where they lived. If this is not our experience, how do we think we would respond were our faith severely tested, especially with the possibility of losing our lives? What about when our faith is tested in different ways? Verses 19 to 23 document the event of throwing the three men into the fiery furnace, fully clothed, which apparently was an anomaly. And it is recorded that due to the heat of the furnace, the soldiers who threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace died due to the intense heat. There is no reason to believe that these three men did not die, except that we have verses 24 and 25, which tell us that not only did the three men not die, but a fourth joined them, and all were seen walking around in the furnace. 3 men went in, now we have 4. What is happening? Who is this fourth person? Well, according to King Nebuchadnezzar, this fourth person looks like deity or a god. Don't you think it's interesting that the same one who put the 3 men in the furnace not only now sees a fourth, but attributes that person to being some form of deity? I suspect that the king was correct, and it was some angelic being that God sent to protect the 3 men who loved him and would not be swayed in their love for and following of him. In verses 26 and 27, there continues to be high drama for King Nebuchadnezzar as he calls the 3 men out of the fire, and they come out completely clothed with not even a hint of smoke smell on them. The crowd of highbrow officials, officers, governors, and advisors are in complete shock at what they are seeing. Who wouldn't be? They know the fire in the furnace was stoked 7 times hotter than usual to ensure that these 3 men died quickly, and yet here they are, not even with the smell of smoke on them. This is not only dramatic, but completely unexplainable, except for the fact that God intervened. God chose to show his power in a most dramatic and unforgettable way, giving evidence that Nebuchadnezzar was not all-powerful as God is. And so as a result, in verses 28 to 30, the king completely changes his mind on not only Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but praises God for the miracle that took place before him and the other onlookers. The king then goes further to declare that everyone now needs to never speak a word against the God of these three men and Israel. If they do, horrible terror for them personally and all they own will come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar goes on to declare that there is no other God who can rescue like this. His admission is an admirable recognition. Finally, in verse 30, we see that the king goes on to reward the three men for their faithfulness to God by promoting them to higher positions of leadership in Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego not only are rescued from the fiery furnace, but they are recognized and rewarded for their faithfulness to God by an unbelieving king. Something only God could do. Where do you and I stand in our faith journey with Jesus? Are we in a place where we would be unwavering if faced with the loss of our life? Are we in a place where we would be unwavering in the face of criticism, ridicule, or sarcasm about our faith? Are we in a place where we would be unwavering when suffering of some kind becomes a regular occurrence for us due to illness, grief, or some other calamity? I'm going to share a short story with you of when my faith was tested in ways I could never imagine. It was early 1998 when I received a letter from the CRA that I was going to be audited and also that I owed them a lot of money for claiming the clergy housing allowance. And it would be charged what I owed to them at 19.25% interest. And it would constantly, what's that called, where, keeps going up every year and the amount, pardon? Compound interest. Thank you, Katie. That is what they told me. Then in late 1998, I was told that I would become the test case for thousands of people across Canada and that I would go to the Court of Queen's Bench in Toronto and I would have to defend my position and my faith. I went there for 10 days in December of 1999. I could not talk to anyone about what I was going through. They put me in the Sheraton Hotel, and my lawyers informed me that my phone was probably tapped, and I would need to be very careful with what I said, even on the phone. The old dial phone, not the cell phones of these days. I went to court for 10 days. I was hit by all kinds of questions from the CRA lawyers. I had 4 lawyers of my own. They had 3. My lawyers said, answer every question honestly, no matter what they ask. I found out that they had talked to family members, they had talked to friends, they had talked to past men I had dated, including the one I was dating presently, and they asked if whether my faith fit my lifestyle. They wanted to know how I spent my money, where I traveled, the kind of ministry I did. They talked to colleagues of mine. It became a very large court case. It lasted 10 days. Every time I went into the court, the questions were about me and my faith. Did everything I say lined up with how I lived? Did what I do lined up with what I said? On and on. It was a grueling, grueling time. Lots of things happened behind the scene I did not know of. People around the world were praying for me. People called regularly to see how I was doing. The man I was dating would come and we would walk the streets of Toronto and I would weep the entire time. We would stop and have tea or coffee and I would weep. He would bring me flowers, I would weep. That went on for 10 days. He was very kind to me during that time. What I also didn't know is that one of my lawyers did not know Jesus, but his wife had become a follower. And in the process of dealing with me and this court case, things were happening in his heart that I did not know of. What else I didn't know is that the judge was a former minister in the United Church, knew the Bible back and forth and upside down and around. And so when he asked theological questions and I answered them, he would nod his head, and I didn't know that that was his story. When the court case was over, I had to wait until the end of February the next year to know where I stood. Well, you need to know that I won. And I won not only personally, but on behalf of thousands of people across Canada. And what happened is that tax law was changed because of my court battle. What else did I learn? I learned that God, by his Spirit, is always with me. Now I'm going to cry. God works in mysterious ways to bring people to him. That lawyer came to know Jesus through my trial, and at the end sent me a huge, huge check to support me in my work at Youth for Christ, which I was able to share with many other staff because it was so large. I learned that God answers prayer in ways we can't imagine. I learned that the worldwide community faith is an incredible force and stronghold, especially when they pray. And I learned that faith can be very difficult to stand on when everything around you is against you and the faith you hold. But when you go through the fiery furnace, your faith does become stronger. And there are many other things then that life brings your way that you can look back and say, God was faithful then, God will be faithful now. So this week, as you and I go into this week and all it holds for us, may we find strength, hope, peace, and God's abiding presence in all of the challenges to our faith that may come our way. And thank you again for the privilege of being here with you this morning.